Welcome back. As we look at Genesis 38 today, this is another one, as I mentioned yesterday, of those difficult stories in the book of Genesis. This story is about Judah and his daughter-in-law, Tamar. And as we look at this and read through this, you might be thinking, why is this significant at all? Why is this in the Bible? Well, we'll get to that in the end. Genesis 38, verse 1. It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adulamite, whose name was Hirah. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. He took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name We're going to skip a couple chapters as it talks about other sons and different things. Reminder again, read all of the chapter. You don't want to miss this. Verse 9. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. A second son took Tamar as his wife to bear a child for right? That would be the heir. Remember, that's how it was in the Bible, that if a man's wife, or if a man died, the wife, if he had no children, would be given to the second, so that through the second one, the wife may bear a child that would be a descendant of the first. I know, kind of sounds messed up to us, but that's the way it was. So there's a second son, and he was also wicked, and he died, as we read later on. A third son, Shelah, Judah, he was too young to give to Judah as a husband at that point. And let's pick up now with verse 12. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. And when Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah, to his sheep shears, he and his friend Hirah, the Adulamite. And when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear the sheep, she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought that she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come in to you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, what will you give me, that you may come into me? He answered, I will send you a young goat from the flock. And she said, if you give me a pledge until you send it. Verse 18, he said, what pledge shall I give to you? She replied, your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and went away, taking off her veil and put on the garment of her widowhood. Tamar tricked her father-in-law into being the father of her child. Now, this in the law of Moses would be prohibited from the father taking his son's wife, but it wasn't here. But again, it was a trick. Judah didn't know what was going on. He thought it was a prostitute. Now, yeah, that's bad enough, right? But to find out later that it would be his daughter-in-law. We're going to continue with verse 24. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, by the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff. Then Judah identified them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I did not give her my son, Shelah. and he did not know her again. Kind of a messed up story, isn't it? The story that Judah recognizing his sin, that he did not do what he should have by giving his son to Tamar, his third son. And instead, she had to trick him to have a child. She ended up having twins, and one of them, Perez, would be the descendant of the line moving on to King David. So why is this story in the Bible? Because it was through this man, Judah, and Tamar, his daughter-in-law, that they would have the son Perez, who would be a descendant of King David. And as a descendant of King David, he was a descendant of the Messiah, of Jesus. In fact, Tamar is one of the 4 women that are mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus in the book of Matthew. And so as we look at this, we see that God truly does work all things together for his good, for the purposes that he had in store through Judah, through Tamar, to bring about David and ultimately Jesus Christ. Come back tomorrow. We're going to go back to the story of David again. Not David. Got David on the brain right now. You know me. Going back to the story of Joseph, I should say. And it's another difficult story. Wondering where God is in the midst of people trying to deceive. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. God bless.